The $2,000 tariff dividend, what changed overnight? In today's update, we're breaking down a last-minute shift in Washington that could dramatically change what millions of Americans were expecting. For weeks, headlines and social media posts have been buzzing about a possible $2,000 tariff dividend, a payment tied to new trade and manufacturing policies proposed by former President Donald Trump. At first glance, the idea sounded simple and familiar. Another direct cash payment similar to the stimulus checks Americans received during the pandemic. But new details emerging from Congress suggest the reality may be far more complicated and far more limited than many seniors were led to believe. The core idea behind the tariff dividend is based on trade policy. Instead of funding payments through federal debt, the proposal would use revenue collected from tariffs, essentially taxes placed on imported goods from foreign countries. Supporters argue that foreign companies selling products into the U.S. market should help fund economic relief for American households. In theory, this would allow money to flow into Americans' pockets without increasing the national deficit. When the $2,000 figure first surfaced, many people assumed it would be universal. Seniors, retirees, Social Security recipients, and working families all believed they might receive the same flat amount. That assumption spread quickly, especially among older Americans who are still feeling the strain of higher grocery prices, rent increases, and medical costs. For those living on fixed incomes, the idea of an additional $2,000 brought a sense of cautious hope. However, as policy analysts dug deeper into the proposal, a major shift began to appear. According to people familiar with the discussions, early drafts that suggested equal payments to every household are now being reconsidered. Lawmakers and economic advisors are reportedly moving toward a selective distribution model where eligibility would depend on factors such as income, tax filing status, or even consumer spending behavior. This change is what has sparked concern, especially among seniors. Many retirees do not file traditional tax returns. Others rely primarily on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits. If payments are routed strictly through tax data or tied to purchasing patterns, millions of older Americans could find themselves excluded, not because they don't need help, but because they don't fit the new criteria. So, as we begin this series, one thing is already clear. The promise of a simple $2,000 check has evolved into something much more uncertain. And for seniors across the country, the most important question is no longer how much, but who actually qualifies. In the next part, we'll take a closer look at how this plan is supposed to work and why it may not function like a traditional stimulus at all. How tariffs turn into cash payments in theory. To understand why this proposed $2,000 tariff dividend is becoming so controversial, we first need to clearly explain how the system is supposed to work, at least in theory. While the idea sounds straightforward on the surface, the mechanics behind it are anything but simple. Tariffs are essentially taxes placed on imported goods. When foreign-made products such as electronics, clothing, machinery, or household items enter the United States, importers are required to pay these additional fees to the federal government. The Trump proposal centers on the idea that this tariff revenue, which could reach hundreds of billions of dollars per year, should be redirected back to the American people instead of remaining buried inside federal budgets. Supporters describe this as a trade-based dividend. In other words, Americans would become the shareholders of the U.S. economy. When foreign companies pay to access the American market, citizens would receive a portion of that money as a direct benefit. That framing is powerful, especially for voters who feel globalization has cost the country jobs and weakened domestic manufacturing. The original math behind the $2,000 figure came from this logic. If roughly $300 billion were collected annually through tariffs and divided among about 150 million taxpayers, each person could theoretically receive close to $2,000. That number quickly became the headline, even though the assumptions behind it were far from finalized. But here's where the theory starts to break down. Unlike traditional stimulus programs, tariff revenue does not arrive all at once. It accumulates gradually as goods are imported over time. That means payments could not be immediate. The government would first need to collect the funds, process them, and then design a system to redistribute the money, a process that could take many months or longer. Another major complication is who actually qualifies as a shareholder in this model. In corporate dividends, payments go only to those who own shares. Translating that concept to a national economy raises difficult questions. Does every American qualify? Only taxpayers? Only those actively participating in the labor force? Or only consumers whose spending aligns with domestic manufacturing goals? According to recent reports, policymakers are increasingly focused on using the dividend as a behavioral tool rather than a universal benefit. That means the payment may be designed to reward certain actions, such as purchasing American-made goods or meeting specific income criteria. While that approach might support domestic industries, it also introduces barriers, especially for seniors who have limited control over prices, product origins, or tax filing requirements. For retirees living on fixed incomes, this raises serious concerns. Many older Americans prioritize affordability over brand origin. Others rely on automatic Social Security payments and do not interact with the tax system regularly. If eligibility depends on tax records or consumer data, the system could unintentionally exclude millions who need help the most. So while the theory behind the tariff dividend sounds bold and innovative, the reality is far more complex. In the next part, we'll examine how this shift from a universal payment to a selective benefit could specifically affect seniors, retirees, and those receiving Social Security or disability benefits. Why seniors could be left out of the $2,000 dividend. As excitement around the $2,000 tariff dividend spread, seniors across the country began asking a simple but critical question: will this apply to me? Unfortunately, based on the latest policy discussions, the answer is becoming increasingly uncertain and for many retirees potentially disappointing. One of the biggest concerns is how eligibility may be determined. Unlike previous stimulus checks, which were largely distributed through existing IRS and Social Security Administration systems, the tariff dividend may rely heavily on tax filings, income records, or consumer data. That immediately raises red flags for older Americans who do not fit neatly into those systems. Millions of seniors live primarily on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits. Many of them do not file annual tax returns because their income falls below filing thresholds. Others file only minimal returns with limited reported spending. If the tariff dividend is tied to taxable income or purchasing patterns, these individuals could be overlooked, not intentionally, but structurally. Another issue involves consumer behavior. Some early versions of the plan suggest that payments could be higher for households that actively support American-made products. While this might sound reasonable in theory, it creates practical problems for retirees. Seniors often buy based on price, availability, and medical necessity, not country of origin. Prescription drugs, medical devices, household essentials, and mobility equipment are frequently imported, leaving seniors with little choice in how or where they spend their money. Advocacy groups for older Americans have already voiced serious concerns. They argue that seniors are among the most vulnerable to inflation, especially when it comes to healthcare, housing, and food. Yet under a selective dividend system, those same individuals may receive reduced payments or none at all, despite facing the greatest financial pressure. There is also the issue of administrative access. During previous stimulus programs, Social Security recipients benefited from automatic enrollment. Checks were issued without requiring additional paperwork. With the tariff dividend, however, it remains unclear whether the Social Security Administration would even be involved. If payments are handled strictly through tax or treasury systems, seniors may be forced to navigate unfamiliar processes just to claim what they are entitled to. For many retirees, this situation brings back painful memories from earlier relief efforts. Delays, missing payments, and confusion were common, especially for those with outdated records or limited internet access. The fear now is that a more complex system tied to trade policy could make those problems worse. So while the tariff dividend is being marketed as a benefit for American workers, the reality is that retirees may not be automatically included. And unless specific protections are written into the final policy, millions of seniors could once again find themselves waiting on the sidelines. In the next part, we'll examine how this proposal compares to previous stimulus checks and why the differences matter so much for Social Security recipients. How this proposal differs from past stimulus checks. To fully understand why the $2,000 tariff dividend has created so much uncertainty, it helps to compare it with the stimulus checks Americans received during the pandemic. On the surface, both involve direct payments to individuals, but beneath that similarity, the two approaches are fundamentally different, especially for seniors and Social Security recipients. During the COVID relief period, stimulus checks were funded through direct federal spending. Congress approved the money, the Treasury issued the funds, and the IRS worked closely with the Social Security Administration to ensure that retirees, SSI, SSDI, and VA beneficiaries received payments automatically. Seniors did not need to prove consumer behavior, trade participation, or purchasing patterns. Eligibility was largely based on income and existing benefit records. The proposed tariff dividend works in a completely different way. Instead of Congress authorizing immediate payments, the money would come from tariffs collected over time. That means there is no guaranteed pool of funds available up front. Payments would depend on how much tariff revenue is actually collected, how quickly it flows into federal accounts, and how lawmakers choose to distribute it. Another major difference is intent. Past stimulus checks were designed to provide emergency relief. Their goal was to stabilize households during an economic crisis. The tariff dividend, by contrast, is being positioned as a policy incentive. It's meant not only to provide money, but also to encourage certain behaviors, like buying American-made goods or supporting domestic manufacturing. This shift in purpose has serious implications. When payments are tied to behavior, they are no longer universal. They become conditional. And conditional programs almost always create winners and losers. Seniors, especially those living on fixed incomes, are often placed at a disadvantage because they have less flexibility in how they earn and spend money. There is also a question of administration. With stimulus checks, agencies already had systems in place. The IRS and SSA shared data, coordinated payment methods, and corrected errors over time. With the tariff dividend, no such system currently exists. Lawmakers have not confirmed whether the IRS, Treasury, or Social Security Administration would handle payments. That uncertainty increases the risk of delays and exclusions. For older Americans, this comparison is critical. Many seniors assume that because stimulus checks were eventually delivered, a new payment would follow the same path. But this proposal breaks that pattern entirely. Without clear protections, seniors could be forced to navigate new eligibility rules, unfamiliar processes, or digital systems they've never used before. The lesson here is simple but important. Just because a payment is described as stimulus-like does not mean it will function like past stimulus programs. And as we'll see in the next part, the way this plan could affect prices and inflation may further complicate its real value for retirees. The inflation trade-off. Could prices rise before checks arrive? One of the most important and least discussed aspects of the $2,000 tariff dividend is its potential impact on prices. While the idea of receiving a check sounds helpful, many economists warn that higher costs could arrive long before any money does, especially for seniors living on fixed incomes. Tariffs, by design, raise the cost of imported goods. When companies pay more to bring products into the United States, those costs are often passed on to consumers. That means everyday items like groceries, clothing, electronics, household supplies, and even some medical equipment could become more expensive. For retirees who carefully budget each month, even small price increases can add up quickly. Supporters of the tariff dividend argue that higher prices are a short-term trade-off. Their position is that tariffs will encourage companies to move production back to the United States, creating jobs and strengthening domestic supply chains. Over time, they believe this could stabilize prices and reduce dependence on foreign manufacturing. But critics point out that over time offers little comfort to seniors struggling right now. Another concern is timing. Even if the tariff dividend is approved, payments would not be immediate. Tariff revenue must first be collected, processed, and allocated. That could take months or longer. In the meantime, price increases could begin almost as soon as new tariffs are implemented. For seniors, this creates a dangerous gap. Higher expenses today with no guarantee of relief tomorrow. There's also the question of scale. A one-time payment of $2,000 may help cover short-term expenses, but if inflation continues to push prices higher, the long-term benefit could quickly disappear. Seniors who spend a large portion of their income on essentials like food, utilities, rent, and healthcare are especially vulnerable to this effect. Financial analysts caution that inflation impacts are not evenly distributed. Higher-income households may absorb price increases more easily. Retirees and disabled individuals often cannot. That's why some experts worry the tariff dividend could unintentionally shift financial pressure onto those least able to handle it. This concern is especially relevant as many seniors are already watching the calendar for future Social Security cost of living adjustments, or COLAs. While inflation has cooled slightly in recent months, prices remain significantly higher than they were just a few years ago. Any new policy that risks pushing costs higher is being examined closely by advocacy groups and economists alike. So when evaluating the promise of a $2,000 check, it's important to look beyond the headline. The real question is not just how much money might arrive, but how much purchasing power seniors could lose along the way. In the next part, we'll look at the political motivations behind the tariff dividend and why its rollout may be closely tied to the 2026 election cycle. Politics, timing, and the 2026 election factor. As discussions around the $2,000 tariff dividend continue, it's impossible to ignore the political timing surrounding this proposal. With the 2026 election cycle approaching, many analysts believe the idea is not only an economic policy but also a strategic message aimed at voters who feel left behind by globalization and rising living costs. For supporters of former President Trump, the tariff dividend represents a bold alternative to traditional government spending. Instead of borrowing money to fund stimulus checks, this plan would rely on revenue collected from foreign companies through tariffs. That message resonates strongly with voters who are concerned about national debt and who believe America should rely less on overseas production. From a political standpoint, the promise of a direct payment is powerful. Americans remember the immediate relief provided by earlier stimulus checks. Even the possibility of another payment can generate attention, excitement, and hope. For seniors, especially those living on Social Security, any discussion of additional income carries significant emotional weight. However, critics argue that the details are intentionally vague. While the $2,000 figure is easy to promote, the eligibility rules, distribution methods, and timeline remain unclear. Some analysts warn that this uncertainty allows the proposal to function more as a campaign talking point than a guaranteed benefit, at least for now. Timing is another critical factor. Even if lawmakers move quickly, implementing a tariff-based payment system would take time. Tariffs must be approved, applied, collected, and then converted into distributable funds. That process could stretch well beyond election season, meaning voters might hear about the benefit long before anyone actually receives it. For seniors, this raises an important concern. Many retirees remember previous situations where promises of relief were delayed or changed once political priorities shifted. There is a growing fear that older Americans could once again be used as a talking point without receiving meaningful protection in the final policy. At the same time, the tariff dividend does tap into a broader sense of economic frustration. Rising prices, housing costs, and healthcare expenses have eroded purchasing power, especially for those on fixed incomes. Politicians from both sides of the aisle understand that addressing these concerns or appearing to address them is essential in winning voter trust. The challenge, however, lies in execution. If the final version of the tariff dividend excludes large groups of seniors or delivers less than promised, the political fallout could be significant. Voters who feel misled may respond with skepticism rather than support. As this proposal moves forward, it's important for seniors to separate political messaging from policy reality. In the next part, we'll examine what experts and advocacy groups are saying about how this plan could be improved and whether changes could still protect retirees and Social Security recipients. What experts say must change to protect seniors. As uncertainty continues to surround the $2,000 tariff dividend, economists, policy analysts, and senior advocacy groups are increasingly vocal about one key point. If this plan moves forward, it must be redesigned to protect retirees and vulnerable Americans. Many experts agree that the biggest flaw in the current proposal is its lack of automatic inclusion. During previous stimulus programs, Social Security recipients, SSI, SSDI, and VA beneficiaries were included without having to file extra paperwork. That system worked because it relied on existing benefit records. Analysts argue that the same approach should be used again, regardless of how the dividend is funded. Advocacy organizations representing older Americans warn that tying payments to tax filings or consumer behavior is a recipe for exclusion. Seniors often have limited taxable income and little control over where goods are manufactured. Medical supplies, prescriptions, and essential household items are frequently imported, making it unrealistic to expect retirees to shop their way into eligibility. Another recommendation from experts is simplicity. The more complex a program becomes, the more likely it is to fail the people it's meant to help. Economists point to past relief efforts as evidence that automatic payments reduce delays, errors, and confusion. For seniors who may lack internet access or struggle with digital forms, simplicity isn't a convenience, it's a necessity. There is also concern about equity. If higher-income households or those who spend more on American-made products receive larger dividends, the program could unintentionally widen economic gaps. Experts argue that relief programs should prioritize need, not spending power. For seniors on fixed incomes, even modest support can make a meaningful difference in quality of life. Some analysts have proposed a hybrid approach. Under this model, a baseline payment would be guaranteed to all Social Security and disability beneficiaries, while additional funds could be distributed through other channels. This would ensure that retirees are not left out while still allowing policymakers to pursue broader economic goals. Another critical issue is communication. Experts stress that seniors deserve clear, honest information. Overpromising and under-delivering erodes trust, especially among older Americans who rely on stable and predictable income. Transparent eligibility rules and realistic timelines are essential if the government wants public support. Ultimately, the message from experts is consistent. The tariff dividend concept may be innovative, but without deliberate safeguards, it risks repeating the same mistakes seen in past relief efforts. Seniors should not have to worry about being overlooked simply because they are retired. In the final part, we'll bring everything together: what this proposal really means for seniors, what remains uncertain, and what steps older Americans can take right now while waiting for official decisions. What seniors should do now as this plan develops. As we wrap up this series on the proposed $2,000 tariff dividend, one message stands out clearly for seniors: nothing is final yet. While the idea continues to evolve in political and economic discussions, there are still many unanswered questions about eligibility, timing, and distribution. That uncertainty makes it especially important for older Americans to stay informed and prepared. First, seniors should be cautious about headlines or social media posts that present the tariff dividend as guaranteed. At this stage, the proposal is still being debated among advisors, economists, and lawmakers. The final version, if it even becomes law, may look very different from what has been discussed so far. Avoid making financial decisions based on assumptions about receiving a $2,000 payment. Second, it's wise for retirees to ensure their records are up to date. In past relief programs, delays often occurred because of outdated addresses, bank information, or benefit records. Seniors receiving Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or VA benefits should periodically review their information with the appropriate agencies. If automatic payments are included in any future plan, accurate records could make a significant difference. Third, seniors should continue monitoring official updates from trusted sources. Changes to trade policy, tariffs, or benefit programs are often announced gradually. Understanding how these policies intersect with Social Security, Medicare, and cost of living adjustments is key to protecting financial stability. Knowledge remains one of the strongest tools retirees have. Financial planning is also critical during uncertain times. Even the possibility of higher prices due to tariffs means seniors should review monthly budgets carefully. Identifying essential expenses, planning for potential cost increases, and building small emergency buffers can help reduce stress while waiting for clarity. It's also important for seniors to make their voices heard. Advocacy groups play a major role in shaping policy outcomes. Lawmakers pay attention when retirees speak up about fairness, inclusion, and financial security. Policies that overlook seniors often change only after public pressure is applied. Finally, remember what this discussion truly represents. The tariff dividend debate is not just about one potential check, it's about how economic policy affects real lives, especially those who have already contributed decades of work to the country. Seniors deserve transparency, fairness, and respect in any relief program. As this story continues to develop, staying informed and prepared will remain essential. Whether or not the tariff dividend becomes reality, understanding the system puts seniors in a stronger position to protect their financial future. Thank you for staying with us through this analysis. We'll continue to follow this issue closely and break down every update in clear, simple terms, because every American deserves to know how these decisions affect their lives.